The Jedi Order had a 25,000 year long history, and so, as you might expect for an order so old, it had a good many traditions as well. Just like in many other religious orders, these included special sects to which some members of the order belonged. The most well-known of these Jedi sects were the three Jedi classes: the Jedi Guardians, Jedi Sentinels, and Jedi Consulars. Each of these sects had their own approaches to the life of a Jedi and their own conceptions of how best to serve the Force. However, with the long history of Jedi falling to the dark side in mind, this begs a question: were any of these sects dangerous? Was there one with a noticeable trend of producing dark Jedi?
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Now, before we get into this, we're going to quickly address something we know someone is typing a comment about right now. As many of you likely know, the concept of Jedi being divided into Guardians, Consulars, and Sentinels originated from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, essentially as a gameplay mechanic. There's a bit of a misconception that these three classes existed only as a game mechanic, however, which is simply not the case. In Legends, which we'll be focusing on today, these classes were mentioned and described at length in many other sources, notably including the sourcebook, The Jedi Path, and all three classes are actually mentioned in a few canon works as well. Now, let's get into things. All of the Jedi sects were, of course, followers of the light side of the Force, and they all followed the same Jedi code. They differed primarily in tactics and their approach to the Force, not in overall ideology. The Jedi Guardians, the largest sect, believed in direct action as a solution to injustice, and focused on honing their combat skills and physical capabilities. The Jedi Consulars were revered all over the galaxy as diplomats and arbiters, trained primarily in non-combat related techniques. The smallest sect, the Jedi Sentinels, adopted a sort of hybrid approach, focusing on learning as many skills as they could so as to root out the dark side wherever it could be found. We've actually done a full video on them before, if you're interested. These sects also had a few traditions and special ranks of their own. Many Jedi Guardians, for example, aspired to reach the high rank of Weapons Master, a rare Jedi rank that only the greatest combatants in the Jedi Order could attain. All of the Jedi sects had traditions concerning lightsaber crystals as well, though there are countless examples of Jedi who disregarded this tradition. Jedi Guardians typically used blue lightsaber crystals, Jedi Sentinels typically used yellow, and Jedi Consulars typically used green. This was usually only the case for Jedi Knights and Masters, of course, as Padawans pretty much got whatever the caves on Ilum decided to give them. But onto our central question: did any of these sects have an increased likelihood of producing dark Jedi? The answer is yes, and it was the Jedi Guardians. This isn't just a small trend either. Think of all the famous Jedi turned Sith that you know of. Anakin Skywalker, Dooku, Revan, Malak, Exar Kun, and Ulic Qel-Droma are all prominent examples, and every last one of them was a Jedi Guardian. Many Jedi who struggled with the dark side, or fell yet didn't become Sith, were Guardians as well, including Mace Windu, Quinlan Vos, and Sora Bulk. There's undeniably a pattern here. Of course, we're not saying that all Jedi Guardians were Darksiders, or that being a Jedi Guardian meant that you were somehow closer to the dark side than Consulars or Sentinels. Plo Koon, Aayla Secura, and Qui-Gon Jinn were all Jedi Guardians, for example, and they were some of the best the Jedi Order had to offer. Rather, the role of Jedi Guardian just attracted Jedi who were at risk of falling more than the other classes did. This wasn't for the reason you think it is, either. To understand why this pattern existed, we need to take a closer look at the Jedi Guardians. As aforementioned, they focused a fair bit on physical attributes. The average Guardian, when not on assignment, spent about 3 hours a day on intensive exercise and combat drills. Guardians were usually the best lightsaber duelists in the Order, and their use of the Force focused on making themselves and their allies stronger, faster, and more aware. However, there's something we need to get out of the way first. The Jedi Guardians did not produce more Darksiders because they focused on combat. Instead, we need to take a look at the ideology of the Guardians to understand why so many of them fell. The Guardians saw themselves as, well, Guardians. They were the ones who went out to protect peace and justice in the Republic. They kept the Republic safe from threats in wild space in its early years, they served on the front lines in the Sith Wars, and during the Golden Age, they battled piracy and slavery all over the Outer Rim. Though the Jedi Order never succeeded in ending slavery, as they were neither numerous or powerful enough to have been able to, the actions of Jedi Guardians nonetheless freed billions from the shackles of the Hutts, Zygerians, Thalassians, and others. When most people thought of Jedi Knights, they thought of Jedi Guardians. Above all, Jedi Guardians were dedicated to justice. They went out and helped those who were in need directly, usually with their lightsabers and combat skills. They were a light in the dark for the galaxy's oppressed, archetypal heroes in many senses. Most Guardians took pride in their campaigns against injustice, as they deserved to. Some even let it get to their head a bit, starting to see themselves as heroes just as many of the beings they helped did. That was where the trouble started. The flaw with the Jedi Guardians wasn't that they did a lot of fighting or anything like that, but rather that some members of their sect tended to attract wannabe heroes. They attracted Jedi Padawans who were overzealous, arrogant, or prideful, and some who had vendettas. Some Jedi Guardians looked at a galaxy full of injustice and saw themselves as its saviors, the only ones who could do what needed to be done. For Jedi Guardians, who frequently had to deal with anger, sadness, and even hatred as a result of their work, what they believed needed to be done could easily lean into the realm of the dark side. As the saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. There's a fine line between justice and revenge, one that many Jedi, not just Guardians, found hard to stand on the right side of. Justice is constructive. It means building people up, redressing them for the wrongs they've suffered, and ensuring as few people as possible have to suffer from the same evils. Revenge, on the other hand, is destructive. It's about giving the evildoers a taste of their own medicine, making them suffer in retribution for how they've made others suffer. Justice is the way of the light side, while revenge is the way of the dark. But for some Jedi Guardians, it was difficult to distinguish between the two in the moment. It was all too easy for Guardians to go on quests of revenge against crime lords and forget entirely about the victims they set out to help in the first place. Think back to all those Guardians turned Sith we mentioned earlier. Those 6 had more in common than just all being Jedi Guardians. They all fell to the dark side for the same reason. They saw some terrible evil and desperately wanted to fix it. As time went on, they came to believe that the Jedi weren't doing enough, that harsher measures needed to be taken to solve the problem. They cut moral corners and they did evil things in their own right, believing that their ends would justify their means. In the pursuit of justice, they fell to the level of revenge. In the end, they became what they despised and were responsible for some of the worst evils in galactic history. Exar Kun's sheer hatred for the Sith led him to study the Sith and, in time, become one himself. Ulic Qel-Droma's quest of vengeance made him into the servant of the very cult he was seeking to destroy. Revan and Malak were so committed to defeating the Mandalorians that they began to do the same terrible things their enemies were prone to do, and worse. Dooku despised the corruption of the Republic, and in his bid to fix it, he ended up helping to create the CIS and the Empire, which were even more corrupt. It's a fair bet that we don't need to remind you of the story of Anakin Skywalker. You get the picture. So, that's why Jedi Guardians were more prone to falling to the dark side than Jedi of other sects. But what do you think? What Jedi class is your favorite? Let us know in the comments section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next video.